The sound of a heavy diesel engine idling outside a front window is rarely a good sign, especially at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday. For Michael, who was sitting at the kitchen table trying to coax his 78-year-old mother, Eleanor, into eating her oatmeal, the sound was ominous. It sounded industrial. It sounded like destruction. He stood up, leaving his coffee steaming on the table, and walked to the front window. He pulled back the beige curtains that his mother had sewn by hand 20 years ago. What he saw made his blood run cold, and then immediately boil with a specific kind of rage that only homeowners in America understand. Parked directly in front of their driveway was a flatbed truck with a contractor's logo on the side. 2 men were unloading sledgehammers and crowbars. Standing next to them, holding a clipboard like a weapon of war, was Janice Miller. She was the president of the Cypress Creek Homeowners Association, and she was pointing a manicured finger directly at the wooden wheelchair ramp Michael had finished building only 3 days ago. He watched as one of the workers stepped onto the lawn, boots sinking into the grass, and approached the ramp. Janice checked her watch, then made a "cut it" motion with her hand. They weren't there to inspect it, they were there to demolish it. Michael looked back at his mother. She was trembling, her frail hands gripping the spoon. She had seen the truck too. She knew what was happening. The ramp was her only way out of the house. It was her lifeline to doctors, to the park, to the world. And the HOA had decided, without a court order and without a shred of human decency, that it was coming down today. Michael didn't grab a weapon. He didn't call the police, not yet. He grabbed a folded document from the counter, the one stamped with the seal of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and he opened the front door. Janice didn't know it yet, but she wasn't just standing on his lawn. She was standing on the precipice of a federal lawsuit that would cost her community everything. To understand why this moment was so explosive, you have to understand the people involved. This wasn't just a dispute about wood and nails. It was a clash of 2 very different worlds. Eleanor Davis was a retired librarian. She had lived in Cypress Creek for 30 years. She was the kind of neighbor who baked cookies for new arrivals and remembered everyone's birthday. She had bought this house with her late husband when the subdivision was brand new, back when it was just a quiet loop of modest homes surrounded by woods. But time had been cruel to Eleanor. A stroke 6 months ago had left her partially paralyzed on her left side. She required a wheelchair, and her mobility was severely limited. Her son, Michael, was a contractor by trade. He was a man of few words, capable and fiercely loyal. When his father passed and his mother's health declined, he didn't hesitate. He moved into the guest room to become her full-time caregiver. He was the kind of man who believed that if you followed the rules and did good work, you would be left alone. He believed that a man's home was his castle, and his duty was to protect the family inside it. Then there was the Cypress Creek Homeowners Association. Over the years, the neighborhood had gentrified. The woods were cut down for more houses, and the board had shifted from neighbors helping neighbors to a rigid, bureaucratic regime obsessed with property values. At the head of this regime was Janice Miller. Janice was a woman who treated the HOA bylaws like scripture. She was the type of president who patrolled the streets in her golf cart, measuring grass height with a ruler. She believed that uniformity was the highest virtue. To Janice, a house wasn't a home. It was an investment asset that needed to look exactly like the brochure photos. Anything that broke the visual symmetry of the street was, in her eyes, a direct attack on her leadership. The core issue was simple, or at least it should have been. Eleanor could no longer navigate the 3 concrete steps leading up to her front porch. She had been effectively trapped inside her own home for weeks. Michael, using his skills as a licensed contractor, had designed and built a sturdy, safe wooden ramp over the steps. It was neat, it was functional, and it was absolutely necessary. But to the HOA, it was an unauthorized exterior modification. And in Cypress Creek, unauthorized modifications were treated like crimes. The trouble didn't start with the demolition crew. It started 6 weeks earlier, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Michael had just brought Eleanor home from the rehabilitation center. Getting her wheelchair up the concrete steps had been a nightmare. It had taken 2 neighbors helping Michael to lift the chair safely onto the porch while Eleanor cried in embarrassment. It was a humiliating, dangerous ordeal. That night, Michael sat down with the HOA bylaws. He read them cover to cover. He knew the rules. He knew that any exterior change required approval from the Architectural Committee, or the ACC. He drafted a professional plan. He drew up blueprints showing a ramp that would run parallel to the house, hidden behind the hedges as much as possible. He selected high-quality lumber that he planned to stain to match the house's trim. He submitted the application the next morning, marked urgent, medical necessity. In most reasonable communities, this would be a rubber stamp approval. It takes 5 minutes to review a ramp application for a disabled resident. But Cypress Creek was not a reasonable community. 2 weeks passed without a word. Michael called the management company. They told him it was under review. Another week passed. Eleanor missed a doctor's appointment because Michael couldn't get her down the stairs safely in the rain. Finally, a letter arrived. It wasn't an approval. It was a rejection. The letter, signed by Janice herself, stated, "The proposed structure violates Article 4, Section 2 of the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions regarding aesthetic harmony. Wood ramps are not permitted in the front elevation. The board suggests you explore installing an electronic chairlift system or ramp in the rear of the property." Michael stared at the letter in disbelief. A rear ramp was impossible. The backyard was on a steep slope with no driveway access. An electronic lift cost nearly $10,000, money they didn't have after paying for Eleanor's medical bills. Michael requested a meeting. He went to the monthly board gathering and explained the situation. He explained the cost. He explained the safety risk. He showed them the photos of the slope in the backyard. Janice looked at him over her reading glasses, her expression unmoved. "Mr. Davis," she said, in front of the crowded room, "we all sympathize with your mother's condition, but if we allow you to build a wooden ramp in the front yard, we have to allow everyone to build whatever they want. It sets a precedent. It lowers property values. We have standards to maintain." Michael left that meeting with a pit in his stomach. He had tried to do it the right way. He had asked for permission. But his mother needed to get to dialysis. She needed to her cardiologist. This wasn't about aesthetics anymore. It was about survival. So, the next weekend, Michael did what a son has to do. He went to the lumberyard, bought the wood, and built the ramp. He built it solid, he built it safe, and he built it without their stamp of approval. He figured that once they saw how professional it looked, they would let it slide. He was wrong. The reaction was immediate. The paint on the ramp hadn't even dried before the first violation notice appeared taped to the front door. Violation, unauthorized structure, fine, $100, remedy, remove immediately. Michael tore it down and threw it in the trash. He focused on his mother. For the first time in months, Eleanor was able to roll out onto the porch and sit in the sun. She could get to the car without fear of being dropped. The relief on her face was worth every penny of the fine. But the HOA didn't stop at one notice. They shifted into high gear. Daily fines began to accrue, $100 a day for every day the ramp remained. Michael received certified letters every Friday updating him on the balance. $700, $1,400, $2,100. Then came the social pressure. Janice began posting on the community's private Facebook group. She didn't name Michael directly, but she posted photos of the ramp with captions like, "It's a shame when residents choose to ignore the rules we all agreed to. This kind of eyesore affects the value of every home on the block. We must remain vigilant." Neighbors who used to wave at Eleanor started looking away when they drove past. The narrative Janice was spinning was effective. She painted Michael not as a devoted son, but as a rogue contractor who was trashing the neighborhood. She made the other residents fear for their own home values. One afternoon, Michael came home to find a towing company looking at his truck, which was parked in the driveway. Janice had called them, claiming the truck was a commercial vehicle because it had a toolbox in the bed, another violation of the bylaws. Michael managed to stop the tow driver, but the message was clear. They were going to make his life hell until the ramp was gone. Eleanor noticed the stress on her son's face. "Maybe we should just take it down, Mikey," she whispered one evening, tears in her eyes. "I don't want to cause trouble. I can just stay inside." That broke Michael's heart. "No, Ma," he said, holding her hand. "You have a right to leave your house. We aren't taking it down." He tried one last diplomatic approach. He wrote a formal appeal letter attaching a doctor's note explicitly stating that the ramp was a medical necessity. He cited the urgency of her condition. He offered to plant tall hedges to screen the ramp from the street completely at his own expense. The response from the HOA board came 3 days later. It was a single page. "Appeal denied. The structure is non-compliant. The board has authorized the removal of the unauthorized improvement at the homeowner's expense if not removed voluntarily by October 15th. October 15th was today. The escalation hit its peak that Tuesday morning. This brings us back to the demolition crew standing on the lawn. Michael stepped out onto the porch, the screen door slamming behind him. The morning air was crisp, but the tension was hot enough to burn. "Get off my property," Michael said. His voice was low, steady, and dangerous. Janice Miller looked up from her clipboard, adjusting her sunglasses. She didn't look intimidated. She looked bored. "Mr. Davis," she said, shouting over the idle of the truck, "you were given ample notice. You chose to ignore our bylaws and our fines. Under Section 9 of the CC&Rs, the association has the right to abate violations on the exterior of the property." She motioned to the foreman. "Go ahead, guys, start with the railings." The foreman, a burly man who looked like he just wanted to get paid and go home, hefted a crowbar. He took a step toward the ramp. "I'm warning you," Michael said, stepping down the ramp to block his path. "If you touch a single board on this ramp, I will have you arrested for destruction of private property and trespassing." The foreman paused, looking back at Janice. "He can't arrest you," Janice snapped. "We have a legal right to enforce our covenants. Proceed." "Stop!" The shout came from the street. It wasn't Michael. It was Mrs. Gable, a neighbor from 3 doors down. She was walking her dog, but she had stopped dead in her tracks. "Janice, you can't do this," Mrs. Gable yelled. "Eleanor needs that ramp. How is she supposed to get to the doctor?" "Stay out of this, Brenda," Janice yelled back. "Unless you want to pay his fines for him. This is about maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood." "It's about cruelty," Mrs. Gable shouted. More neighbors were starting to come out of their houses. The noise of the truck and the shouting had drawn a crowd. Some looked sympathetic to Michael. Others looked at Janice, waiting to see who would win. Janice realized she was losing control of the narrative. She needed to act fast. "Tear it down," she ordered the foreman, "now." The foreman looked at Michael, then at Janice. He sighed and stepped forward. "Look, buddy, I gotta do my job. Just step aside." Michael didn't move. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. "I'm calling the police." "Call them," Janice laughed. "The police don't enforce civil contracts. They'll tell you it's a civil matter and drive away. And by the time they leave, this pile of lumber will be wood chips." She was right about one thing. Police often hate getting involved in HOA disputes. But she was wrong about something else. This wasn't just a civil contract anymore. Michael held up the phone, but he didn't dial 911. He dialed a number he had saved under attorney. "Put it on speaker," Michael said to himself, waiting for the connection. The turning point had actually happened 3 days prior, though Janice didn't know it. After the final rejection letter, Michael had stopped trying to reason with the board. He had spent an entire night online researching. He wasn't looking for HOA loopholes anymore. He was looking for federal law. He had stumbled upon the Fair Housing Act, FHA, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. Specifically, he found case law regarding reasonable accommodations. The law was clear. Housing providers, including HOAs, must make reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. Refusing to allow a wheelchair ramp or demanding an expensive alternative that the homeowner cannot afford is effectively discrimination. Michael had found a local attorney named Sarah Jenkins who specialized in disability rights. He had met with her on Monday morning. When she saw the emails from Janice, the ones calling the ramp an eyesore and suggesting Eleanor should just move to an assisted living facility if she can't manage the stairs, Sarah Jenkins had actually smiled. "This isn't a dispute, Michael," the lawyer had said. "This is a retirement fund. They have handed you a discrimination lawsuit on a silver platter." Sarah had drafted a cease and desist order and a formal notification of a federal complaint filed with HUD, Housing and Urban Development. Back on the lawn, Michael's phone connected. "This is Sarah Jenkins," the voice came over the speakerphone, loud and clear. "Sarah," Michael said, keeping his eyes locked on Janice. "I have the HOA president and a demolition crew on my lawn right now. They are attempting to forcibly remove the ramp." There was a brief silence on the line. Then the lawyer's voice turned razor sharp. "Put me on with the president now." Michael held the phone out toward Janice. "It's for you." Janice rolled her eyes but stepped closer. "Who is this? I don't have time for—" "Ms. Miller," the lawyer interrupted. "My name is Sarah Jenkins. I am an attorney representing Eleanor Davis. You are currently standing in violation of the Federal Fair Housing Act. We have already filed a complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development regarding your discriminatory practices." Janice scoffed. "This is a private community. We have bylaws." "Federal law supersedes your bylaws, Ms. Miller," the lawyer continued. "If you or your contractors touch that ramp, I will file an emergency injunction immediately. Furthermore, I will name you, personally, along with the HOA, in a lawsuit seeking punitive damages for harassment, discrimination, and emotional distress. The fines you are threatening are illegal. The removal you are attempting is illegal." The foreman stopped. He lowered the crowbar. He looked at the phone, then at Janice. "And," the lawyer added, "I suggest you inform your contractor that if he proceeds, he will also be named as a defendant for aiding in a civil rights violation. Does his insurance cover federal discrimination lawsuits?" The foreman's eyes went wide. He didn't say a word. He turned around, walked back to the truck, threw the crowbar into the bed, and slammed the gate shut. "Wait," Janice yelled, "you have a contract." "Not for this," the foreman said. "I ain't getting sued by the feds, lady. Fix your own mess." The engine roared, and the truck backed out of the driveway, leaving Janice standing alone on the lawn. The silence that followed the truck's departure was deafening. The neighbors were watching, wide-eyed. Janice stood there, her face flushing a deep, furious red. She looked at Michael, then at the phone he was still holding. "You think this is over?" Janice hissed. "I will bankrupt you with legal fees. We have lawyers too." "Ms. Miller," Michael said calmly, "my lawyer is working on contingency. That means I don't pay unless we win. And looking at you right now, I think we're going to win." Michael wasn't bluffing, and neither was Sarah Jenkins. The lawsuit proceeded swiftly. The discovery phase was devastating for the HOA. Michael's lawyer subpoenaed all the board's emails and text messages regarding Eleanor's ramp. The evidence was damning. In private group chats, Janice and 2 other board members had made fun of Eleanor's disability. They had explicitly discussed using the fines to force Michael to sell the house so they could get younger, wealthier people into the neighborhood. They admitted that the aesthetic argument was just a pretext to get rid of the ramp. It was a clear-cut case of discrimination. The HOA's insurance company took one look at the evidence and the potential damages and panicked. They told the board that if they went to trial, they would lose, and the insurance policy might not cover the punitive damages because the acts were intentional and discriminatory. The insurance company forced the HOA to settle. The terms of the settlement were finalized 3 months later. First, the HOA had to issue a formal written apology to Eleanor Davis. Second, they had to pay for the ramp to be stained and landscaped professionally, at the HOA's expense, not Michael's. Third, they had to pay $150,000 in damages to Eleanor for emotional distress and harassment. Fourth, the HOA board members were required to undergo mandatory training on the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. But the sweetest part of the resolution happened at the next annual meeting. The settlement had drained the HOA's reserve funds. To cover the legal deductibles and the mandatory training, the board had to raise the monthly dues for every resident in Cypress Creek. When the neighbors found out that their dues were going up specifically because Janice Miller had tried to bully an elderly woman in a wheelchair, the backlash was instant. At the annual meeting, a vote of no confidence was called. Janice Miller was voted out of the presidency by a landslide. She tried to argue, tried to blame Michael, but the community had seen her true colors. She was replaced by Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who had yelled from the street. Janice put her house on the market 2 months later. She moved to a condo in Florida. Rumor has it she tried to run for the board there too, but her reputation had followed her. As for Michael and Eleanor, life returned to a peaceful rhythm. The ramp stayed. Michael planted jasmine along the sides, softening the look of the wood just as he had originally planned. Eleanor was able to come and go as she pleased, waving to neighbors from her porch, no longer a prisoner in her own home. The story of the ramp at Cypress Creek serves as a powerful reminder for homeowners across America. Homeowners associations have power, yes, but they are not above the law. Federal protections like the Fair Housing Act and the ADA are there for a reason. They exist to ensure that human dignity and medical necessity take precedence over curb appeal and power-hungry board members. If you find yourself in a battle with your HOA over a disability accommodation, remember Michael's fight. Don't just read the bylaws, read the federal law. Document everything. And never let a bully with a clipboard stand between you and taking care of the people you love. Sometimes the most patriotic thing you can do is stand on your own front lawn and say no.